The confetti has already dropped on the 2024 season, but if you look around, we already got some moves being made for the 2025 season. And this show, The Hard Count, is college football, nothing but college football year round. So naturally, we're going to talk about that, talk about some potentially way too early national title contenders. No harm in that. Glad to have it all here. It is Tuesday, January 28th, 2025. Last one on the face of the planet. Jim Knowles making a move to Penn State. What does that mean for Penn State? Where does Ohio State go from here? Hey, USC making a big-time hire that might have flown under your radar when it comes to what they did at the GM position. Yes, that's a title now that we have to address in college football. But I want to start here. With the confetti having just dropped, as I mentioned, in Atlanta, myself and Cato were there. Who's the confetti dropping on this time next year when we have the national title game being played in Miami? Going to give you my way too early contenders as it sits right now heading into 2025. Now, I got to give a massive, massive disclaimer before we jump into this. We may very well change our minds before spring football on this list. We may pick somebody to win the national title that's not on this list. We're going to have more coordinator hires. We're going to have the transfer portal do its thing. So if you're upset about your team not being on this list, just sit tight. We got a lot of stuff to unpack here and a long way to go before they actually start playing games again. But with that being said, in no particular order, when it comes to my way too early title contenders, I think Texas may very well be the team that I would pick if we had to pick someone today. And I said this a mere few hours after Ohio State won the national title. You look at the way that Texas is built, and if Arch Manning is awesome, phenomenal. I mean, that makes me feel even more fired up about what Steve Sarkisian's doing out there. But what he's done so far at a roster level is build that thing with real deal functional strength on both lines of scrimmage. Now, you got to replace the offensive line a little bit, sure, but what they have coming back on the defensive side, dude, Colin Simmons, freak show of all freak shows. Oh, by the way, he was only a true freshman last year. Anthony Hill, he's coming back. I hope Arch balls out. I really do. I mean, for all of the conversation around what he was as a recruit and everyone having something to say about his last name relative to his rating, I hope he balls out and shuts a lot of those people up. But even if he doesn't go berserk his first year as the guy in Austin, this team is strong enough at the most important spots to be able to bully around a little bit in the SEC. That's saying something. First year in the conference, Quinn Ewers leaves something to be desired through the air. Let's be real about this. He wasn't who we thought he would be. But the way that Sark has built the line of scrimmage at Texas, again, it's not just show muscles. Like, you think about Texas, you think about the wide receivers, you think about Sark wearing a sick suit walking in on game day and them having this certain flash and pizzazz to them. I don't think we've ever used the word pizzazz to describe a college football team, but that's what we think about when it comes to Texas. That's great. They still have those show muscles, but they got real deal like leg strength. Texas squats heavy, both literally and metaphorically when it comes to their roster. I would be very, very excited about them if I'm a Texas fan heading into next season. Now, Ohio State's sitting there, wait a second, and we just won the national championship. You're telling us we're not in this discussion? You are. Ohio State definitely one of our way too early contenders. Go ask Vegas, actually. They give you the best odds for Ohio State to repeat next year. If you're picking from this entire field, they have the shortest odds to win the national championship in 2025. They replace a lot. No way around that. You lose both your running backs more than likely. You lose some key pieces on defense. You lose a Will Howard. So there's a lot of pieces you have to replace, which is why maybe there's some cause for holding your breath a little bit in Columbus. But the thing that makes them scary for me, what we said post-national titles is the same way we feel today. The muscle memory for Ohio State, even with losing the Jim Knowles, we'll see what happens with Chip Kelly as the coordinator out there. I know there's a lot of NFL interest. The way that Ryan Day won the national title last year with his roster, I get it, was super talented. A lot of talent coming back, and Caleb Downs and Jeremiah Smith and all that, and you'll have more than likely a 5-star quarterback and Julian Sam potentially starting for you. There's something to knowing what it looks like, knowing what it feels like, and then being able to duplicate from there. Because for Ohio State, if they were to win the national title next year, they'll probably lose more pieces after that. They'll probably have to replace more coaches. They'll have more guys go to the league. Like, that's the cost of success, is people want to take what you have on your roster and your staff and try to bottle it up and bring it to their place to get national title results. But to know what it looks like, again, know what it feels like, that makes it that much easier to me to be able to duplicate. I'm not trying to oversimplify what it takes to win a national championship, but if you're Ohio State, having gotten over the hump one time for Ryan Day, I think that's impactful, and talent, even with all the pieces they lose from returning production from this year to next year, I'm not wildly concerned about Ohio State in that department. We'll talk more about the Jim Knowles loss a little bit later in the show, but you feel good about Ohio State. One more thing I'll say, Georgia, the year they repeated, Going into that second national title run, they were 96th in returning production. So I don't know where Ohio State's going to fall, but I have a hard time believing they'll be a whole lot lower than 96th in America. Oregon. We'll see what Dante Moore is. I've got confidence in him. I appreciate the fact that he wanted to sit for a year behind a Dylan Gabriel to get his sea legs. I trust Dan Lanning, dude. I feel like I know what they're going to be, and to speak to the Dante Moore side of things, I trust who Will Stein is as an offensive coordinator. Because Bo Nix, remember now, when he got to Oregon, Kenny Dillingham was his offensive coordinator, had success that year. Under Will Stein is when he really, from what I could gather, exploded and became a Heisman finalist. So Will Stein, when it comes to his track record at Oregon with quarterbacks, has been pretty spick and span. They'll still have weapons. They'll still have elite talent. I like Oregon a lot coming into next year. A lot of people have the pushback of, well, Dan Lanning, the Oregon narrative around, well, they get to the postseason and they kind of fold up shop, right? All I can see with Dan Lanning is continued upward trajectory. They won more games every single year. They won the Big Ten last year, the first year in the conference. Dan Lanning isn't even 40 years old yet. So I think Oregon should feel pretty confident about the direction of their program under Lanning, and I feel pretty confident saying they'll be in that national title mix this time next year. Penn State is a school that I'm looking at here when we talk about way too early national title contenders. Now, full transparency. When clock hit 000 in the Orange Bowl, and Notre Dame walks off in a Mitch Jeter field goal, I would not have had Penn State in this discussion. Now, Drew Aller coming back is obviously something that gets you excited, and the running backs coming back is huge. But the thing with Penn State, and we'll talk about this a little bit more as it progresses, the formula they right now have in-house feels very similar to what previous national title teams have had, specifically these last two national title teams, the Michigan and Ohio State. They're going to have a veteran roster, an elite coordinator combo, and a head coach now who a lot of people have an opinion on about what he can't get done. He hasn't gotten over the hump. His record against top 10 teams, he's earned all of those credentials, the negative ones, I suppose, but narratives in modern college football and the 12-team playoff are kind of funny how they don't really tend to stick. So I like the way that Penn State's built, and again, we have more discussion on them later in this live show, but to put it simply, I love the Jim Knowles hire. I think Drew Aller has more in the tank. If they could get some receivers for my guy and Coach Koldenecki, like maybe they'll have a chance to do something exciting, and we'll keep a pulse on them moving forward. Now, I would feel silly to have a discussion around way too early national title contenders and not include the head coach who's won 2 of the last 4 in Kirby Smart. And I get it now, 2 of the last 4 sounds different than 2 of the last 3. But I think we're all ignoring the reality, quite frankly, that Kirby Smart, while they didn't win the national title last year, he may have just had his best coaching job of his career. Legitimately. For them to win the SEC when they really weren't exceptional at any category gives me confidence about them going forward, that Kirby Smart will probably have some more ammo now to work with, to have a hungry Georgia roster. Quarterback, we'll see, but I trust who Kirby Smart is on defense. I trust Glenn Schumann on defense. I trust T-Rob. I trust Georgia and who they are on defense, man. I don't think that there's any cause for concern around that side of the football here moving into next year, especially with what I just said, some real deal ammunition for Kirby Smart to sell to this locker room and tell them how much they're doubted and what they're not and all this, that, and the other. One more thing I'll say, I love the direction they're taking on offense. I'll say that a different way. I love the direction they're taking when it comes to acquiring talent for that offense. Because last year, they led the country in drops. And they threw the football a lot, so I guess the more you throw the football, the greater chance you have of dropping it. But they weren't great at running the football. They didn't have anybody that was an absolute stud on the perimeter. There was no Ladd McConkey. There was no Brock Bauer. There was a whole lot of we'll see if we can win our matchups this weekend. And you saw, quite frankly, Georgia in multiple spots be outmatched up on that side of the football, which sounds bizarre to say out loud when you talk about Georgia. Them going to land a Noah Thomas and a Zachariah Branch. I'm not saying to make the difference between, winning the SEC and getting to the national championship, but I do think overall the posture of, hey, if we want to run an offense like this, we want to be a team that puts in the air as much as we do, we got to have better skill players. And it wasn't but less than a week since Georgia lost that game that they go into the portal and land 2 of those, I would say, top talents at the position. Zachariah Branch, one of the top players in the portal, period. And Noah Thomas, what he did at A&M and being a 14 yards a catch kind of guy, that's a step in the right direction. So Georgia, with the Kirby effect, with a couple of years down, actually makes me feel confident in their direction going forward, actually. but Georgia has to be in the discussion. One more team I want to add here. Now, we're not going through the entire FBS as much as it feels like it now. We've talked about multiple teams. One more team that I actually feel really intrigued by, and might be the sneakiest of this whole group, is Clemson. Now, roll with me here. The reasons why we used to have a problem, why I had a problem with Clemson in the last couple of seasons, those are starting to dissipate a little bit. My problem was Cade Klubnik, good player. I don't really see it right now. I don't see Deshaun Watson or Trevor Lawrence or anyone like that. And he doesn't have to be those guys, but he's continuing to show he's progressing, improving. It's another year now in the system under Garrett Riley, where he just improved almost 1,000 yards through the air from last year to this year. Okay, so he's speaking the language, he's seeing it, and he's having success with Garrett Riley. The other issue I had was I don't see any explosive weapons. I don't see a Mike Williams out there. I don't see a Artavius Scott out there. I don't see anybody that gets me super excited about what Clemson is on the perimeter. Right now, Clemson has two really good receivers that were both freshmen last year that were top 3 on the team when it came to yards per reception, and a Bryant Wesco and a TJ Moore. So they have to take that next step, but if that's the jump-off point from last year to this year where they're both over 14 yards a catch, okay, we can work with that. So the explosive weapons, Cade Klubnik being the quarterback, I feel better about both those spots. The third thing here, Dabo being quote-unquote stuck in his ways, which is kind of something we've all talked about. And the portal is one thing. It's nice to see them go to the portal, but them hiring a Tom Allen, them going outside of the defensive staff at Clemson to grab a guy from Penn State who led one of the best defenses in college football last year, that's encouraging. So to see Dabo being willing to kind of stick and move a little bit on his previous practices and their previous philosophies, not that it didn't work, it just felt like it had to be tinkered with a little bit. Because Clemson as a brand, I think, still has a lot of power, and them going and landing a coordinator who played in the semifinal game should prove as much. The schedule, too, is very workable. This is the only schedule I'm talking about with this group, but I think it's worth noting. Open with LSU at the crib. Got to go to South Carolina. Those are the only 2 games I see on here for Clemson that I'm like, those will be really good roster tests. Now, the key there is you got to make sure you don't slip up in a spot where you have a better roster. That's Syracuse, that's at North Carolina. Of course, Clemson's not immune to that, but if that's the season for Clemson, there's a path there where they find themselves in the college football playoff with a first-round bye, and we'll see what happens from there. Dabo Swinney, also worth noting, has 2 national titles to his name. Only other coach right now that's currently coaching that has that same credentials or same skins on the wall is Kirby Smart. So the way too early national title contenders for us, in no particular order: Texas, Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, Georgia, and the Clemson Tigers just hanging out on the Roy bus. But I like the way they're built, like their schedule, and I'm curious to see what they look like here going forward. Appreciate everyone tuned in live. Make sure you have subscribed to the channel if you haven't already. A lot of content coming your way. As we just charge on here throughout the rest of the offseason. Also, we have a podcast product. We don't really talk about that nearly enough on this show, but we're kind of entering into that part of the year where I know a lot of y'all got some drive time ahead of you. I know a lot of y'all are trying to find some college football content, whether you're doing carpool with the kids or you're going to practice or you're driving home for summer break. Whatever it is, we got a podcast product, The Hard Count with JD PicKell. Wherever you get your podcast, we got you covered. So go ahead and lock it in over there. The Hard Count, brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks, daily fantasy, easy to use, easy to play. Code HardCount gets you gets you $50 in promo funds, when you play a $5 lineup using code HardCount. Here's what I'll say. That code, I believe, will be good until the beginning of February. Once we hit February 1st, I'm not 100% sure you'll be able to use that code. So if you haven't yet, $5 in lineups gets you $50 in promo funds. Just go ahead and get it locked in now so you can play for the Super Bowl, and you'll be off to the races. So again, code HardCount. Appreciate Prize Picks. Appreciate y'all locking in, and we'll make the most of the rest of what football season is, which is unfortunately the NFL. Not unfortunately, but we're a college football show, so we're going to max it out here with the NFL rounding us out in this football season. Okay, so speaking of football season ends, and Ohio State hoists the national title trophy, and you're watching the conference championship games being played between the Eagles and the Commanders, and you got the Chiefs and the Bills, and while all that is happening, if you're subscribed to the On3 Twitter account, which I would encourage you to do when it comes to notifications, you get an alert and says Jim Knowles set to be the next defensive coordinator for the Penn State Nittany Lions. And as you see this, your head's kind of spinning a little bit because you thought maybe there was some smoke with Oklahoma, but you also, in your heart of hearts, is like, hey, man, it's Ohio State. Not really going to leave Ohio State after they just won the national championship, is he? Well, he has, in fact, done that. And we'll unpack that right now. So the question is, why would he leave, right? Why would you leave Ohio State after winning the national championship? There's a great article on LettermanRow.com, Ohio State's On3 site, that will unpack this in a little bit more depth. But to put it simply, there was strain, it sounds like, between Jim Knowles and the Ohio State staff. Now, what does that strain entail? I'm not in the building. I can't speak with absolute authority. But if there's strain, it's usually not a super great setup for longevity between those two parties. If you're Ohio State, this isn't an Ohio State segment, but if you're Ohio State, in some ways you say, hey, we won a national title. It's unfortunate it didn't work out. Let's dap it up and we'll go our separate ways. Now, unfortunately, you probably don't dap it up all that strongly because he's going to go coach for a team that you're going to play here going forward and stands in the way of you winning a Big Ten title next year. But for Penn State, this is where I really want us to focus, because how often have we had this discussion around Penn State of saying, man, if they could just get over the hump this year. They got so much talent. They got so much this. They got so much that. This is the year. This is the year for Penn State. Then every year it is, in fact, not the year for James Franklin and Penn State. And what excites me about this move is you can talk about wanting to go win the Big Ten. You can talk about wanting to be a team that hoists a national title trophy. To me, this is Penn State's actions. Yet again, for the second time this offseason, since they lost to Notre Dame, saying we are not settling for anything less than winning a national championship. And we're not settling for anything less than a national title kind of effort on our side. Because if you remember now, not just the Jim Knowles acquisition, I want us to go back to what happened post-Orange Bowl. You lose that game, and we're all like, man, they had a shot. They had Allen, they had Singleton. Abdul Carter's gone to the league, obviously. We'll see what happens to Drew Aller, but this was the roster they had a shot. And then slowly but surely, you start seeing those I'm back declarations. Drew Aller said he was coming back, solidifies he's coming back. Both the running backs, key pieces on defense. I don't believe they're coming back for a free $99 price point. Jim Knowles, Cornell alum, is now the highest paid coordinator in college football. So at the very least now, you're saying for Penn State, the care factor is there. We want to win a national championship, better have some national title resources to back it up. Better have some bat to swing when it comes to trying to go win the national title. And that's the thing here. When you look at previous national title teams, they have a very specific blueprint, I would say, especially these last two national champs. Michigan and Ohio State, what do they have in common? One, great coordinators. I would say as good a coordinator combo in college football was Jim Knowles and Chip Kelly this past season. Ohio State went out and got a Chip Kelly to go with this national title squad this year. And they also have a veteran roster. Now, Ohio State, their returning production numbers are a little bit skewed because of the key pieces they brought in via the portal and because of they lost their quarterback and Marvin Harrison Jr., but the fact remains the same. Over 60% production for Ohio State was back from a season ago. Michigan, the year they won it, they were top 5 in returning production. I don't know where Penn State's going to fall, but I have to believe they'll be somewhere in that top 25, top 15 range. To me, that's good enough. That's good enough when it comes to trying to win a national championship. And I look across the Big Ten, and it's the best conference of college football right now. I don't think that's a stretch. But Penn State, as much as people have concern about what they haven't done under James Franklin, to me, they have the most certainty when it comes to returning quarterback, veteran roster, and coordinators. I think they have the most certainty, I think, in the Big Ten. If you're talking about what's proven, like Oregon, I think they're going to be awesome. I just told you I think they're a national title contending team. There's no guarantee Dante Moore lights the world on fire. No guarantee that he lives up to what he was as a recruit. Michigan, they very likely could have a true freshman starting at quarterback for them next season. I think he's going to be awesome. I think Sharon Moore is going to have that thing humming, but there's no guarantee that they're the stalwart of the Big Ten next season. Ohio State, they're reloading a lot of talent. I think they'll still be stocked, but again, they have a new quarterback. Now, thanks to Jim Knowles, they're going to have a new defensive coordinator. As we sit here right now, Chip Kelly is getting NFL interest. There's no guarantee what Ohio State is next year. Indiana, they made the playoff. New quarterback. USC, new quarterback. Like there's a lot unknown around the Big Ten that we know about Penn State. Like, love him or hate him, I feel like I know the floor of what Drew Aller is. Love him or hate him, I think I know what Andy Koltanecki's offense can be at a base level. Put a pause on that right there. There's two major caveats here for Penn State to go play for what they expect to play for in 2025. And the first caveat is just go get some receivers, dude. It sounds simple. I'm making it way too simple, but everyone knows what the blind spot is for this team. Everyone saw the Orange Bowl and saw you have 0 receivers with a catch in a game you lost by 3 points. Don't pretend that the answer is already in-house. Don't pretend that, okay, we got some dudes that we feel good about. No. If you had some dudes you felt good about, that would have helped you in the Orange Bowl. They would have done something for you at this point, man. You lost Tyler Warren, and he was a stud, but he's not coming back next year. And Trey Wallace and Amari Evans, they're both gone. You brought in Kyron Hudson. I thought that was a more sneaky acquisition via the portal with him coming over from USC. But don't leave this season saying, man, if we only had some receivers, then we could have really competed for what we wanted to compete for. If you do, shame on you. That's malpractice. That's a different conversation after the season. The second major caveat is Jim Knowles and his defense. He's a bit of a mad scientist. Now, he majored in the School of Industrial Labor Relations at Cornell, not in fact a science major. However, kind of a mad scientist when it comes to how he draws up the defense. It's not the easiest to get the hang of, to put it simply. You hear players talk about his defense and it being something that breaks a lot of traditional rules in the defense, breaks a lot of tendencies, and this isn't for me to say, but I do think there's something to be accounted for of it can't be a thing where it takes 2 to 3 years for them to get the defense all the way installed and installed correctly. Like Ohio State's defense, when Jim Knowles took over, they were better, but they also had a lot of lapses where big plays ended up keeping Ohio State from accomplishing their goals. So improvement is great, but don't improve at the cost of a couple of big plays because we're having a difficult time getting this defense down. Like, let's get comfortable in the defense. If we have to distill it down a little bit to let our players make plays, then great, but that can't be another governor for you on this 2025 season because everyone's going to have a take on James Franklin. That's probably the number one comment under this video. Well, they got a quarterback, sure, we'll see. Yeah, they got a coordinator now, awesome. Don't have a head coach. And it hurts a little bit to read that if you're a Penn State fan because you're like, we have a head coach. He's really good, wins a lot of his games, but just not the ones that we need him to win against top 10 teams. So in some ways, like I mentioned at the top of this segment, like he's earned those credentials. But here's the thing I would say when we talk about James Franklin. Let's not pretend that Penn State is just worlds apart when it comes to those top 10 games, especially this season. All 3 of those losses against the top 10 teams were by 1 score. Against Ohio State, against Oregon, and Notre Dame, all by 1 score. So it's not ideal. There's no way to give you a moral victory for losing a game by 1 score against a top 10 team. But let's not pretend that those games couldn't have broken a different way should Penn State have made a play or two there, a play or two here, what have you. Now the reality is you didn't. So what do you do from here? But Penn State, again, with them being as close as they have been this season, it shows there is just the need to break through. There's a need for that flag plant moment, no pun intended on the Ohio State-Michigan deal. There's a need for that sort of moment for Penn State to just look their, I guess, demons in the eye and just to say, not anymore. Not anymore. And the thing that gives me confidence is, again, we're seeing Penn State make real moves to be able to overcome those kind of situations in the future, to be able to overcome what they've lacked in the past. Because I'll say this too, I think Penn State overall, at least against Oregon and Ohio State, they lack talent. And they did not have the talent that those 2 teams had, in my humble opinion. Now, with the narrative around James Franklin, I would just say this. Let's be careful to let narratives be considered absolute truth. Because I said this in our breakout video when Jim Knowles got hired. We're coming off a season now where we had 2 coaches that played for a national title that had a narrative around both of them of they can't win the big one. Marcus Freeman's been a coach for like 5 minutes at the head coaching level at Notre Dame. Everyone's like, I lost to Marsh, lost to NIU. Yeah, he did, but he also got him to a national title. Ryan Day, he can't beat Michigan. I don't know, man. He's just won a national championship in his 6th season, so the narratives have a funny way of not all the time being 100% accurate when it comes to their staying power. So a roundabout way to tell you, I love the Jim Knowles acquisition. I love the way that Penn State's roster is built. I love the formula, and I think that they're going to be a real force here in 2025, pushing all the chips to the table, saying all in, here we go, let's get it done. And again, for narrative's sake, I'm pulling for James Franklin in that way. Now, there's two sides to every coordinator hire. There's the coordinator that gets hired somewhere, and there's the school that loses their coordinator. So what does Ohio State do from here? When you lose your defensive coordinator to a place like Ohio State, it's kind of like having to remodel your kitchen in a really nice house. Like, yeah, it kind of sucks, right? Sort of a pain, but it's still a nice house, still in a nice neighborhood. You still have a massive budget to get it done. So is it uncomfortable? Do you wish you didn't have to do it? Sure. It's not a small thing, but also, like, it's still Ohio State. It's still Tim Walton running the secondary, still James Laurinaitis on that staff, still Larry Johnson running the defensive line. Like, yeah, not fun, but Ohio State still has every reason for optimism here going forward, even with losing their DC from a national title team. So there's a couple of names that I like when you talk about who could be the next guy in Columbus to call the defense. There's a full hot board at on3.com from Pete Nakos. Go check that out. But Bryant Haynes is a name we've discussed before on this show, DC at Indiana, Broyles Award finalist. I like the idea of kind of the rising star mold, if you will. Had one of the best run defenses in America last year. I think that's a phenomenal candidate. Phil Parker from Iowa, a guy who's coached at Iowa for a long time, one of the longest tenured DCs, but you know what you're getting in him. Like, he's had a top 20 scoring defense since 2015. Also, I said he's from Iowa as a coach, but dude's from Ohio. We know Ohio State fans. There's one box they would appreciate having checked when it comes to their staff, one of their own, someone who gets it. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Now, if it's me, I really like the idea of promoting safeties coach Matt Guerrieri to be the DC. Kind of keeps that formula the same. From a schematic perspective, sure, coached around Jim Knowles for a long time, so that side of it could kind of stay the same. But I just appreciate the idea of having someone running your defense who knows what it looks like, knows what a national title defense is supposed to be, knows the silver bullet standard, if you will. And also, it doesn't hurt that this is happening now towards the end of January. Like, who else are you really going to go grab? Remains to be seen. We'll talk about it if that happens. But the task for Ohio State, it's not even about talent, which sounds bizarre, but you look at Ohio State, cool, you got Sonny Styles coming back, Davison Igbinosun coming back. You got Caleb Downs, the best defensive player in college football, coming back. It's not about talent. Now you got to replace production and experience. What you have to replace is leadership and culture. Like Ohio State last year, everyone was talking about this when they won the national title and during their playoff run. Why were they so successful? Because they were running hot. Because they were an angry, hungry dog devouring and spitting out and chewing everything in their way, especially on defense. Who was responsible for that? Yeah, Jim Knowles, of course, played a part as the DC. To me, it was Jack Sawyer who was the temp setter for that operation. Why? Because it meant something to him. Him and the rest of that defense, and what I could gather, again, going back to Jack Sawyer being a temp setter, he was the one that sort of led the charge, sounded the alarm, all those things. And so if it's not about talent, it's about temperature. I love the idea of someone who's been around that temperature, who's been on that staff when that temperature was set at the right spot, being the guy to call the shots for that defense. Okay? Now, you're going to have some new faces, like I mentioned. A lot of starters are gone. Having someone who has the temperature set at the right spot competitively and culturally to bring those guys into that fold, of course, they have to be player-led, but to have the coaches feed that culture and have someone, again, a Matt Guerrieri who would be able to feed that culture, that gets me really excited. And everyone's going to talk about scheme during this coordinator process, and that's fine. I'm here for that. I think scheme is important. But at a place like Ohio State, scheme it should be secondary to everything else you're getting in a DC. Like, the comp for me is like scheme when hiring a coordinator is like looks when you're getting married. It should matter. It should matter at first. It should be a prerequisite, but really I'm more concerned about like who am I getting married to? Who's the person that's going to be my DC, if you will? Like, what are they bringing out of you? Who are they going to be when times get tough? When you get that bad news? When you have some unfortunate circumstances? Who's going to be the one to set the temperature? Who's going to be the one to bring the best out of you? Again, it's a weird comp, but I'm just telling you, looks are a big talking point on the front end. Everyone wants to know what scheme you run, how much they blitz. It's important. It should be a discussion, but it very quickly becomes less important when you're down 17-7 on the road and you got to find a way to get your players in line and have a way to have them play above their level of where they're playing at that point in time. So, again, I like Matt Guerrieri for a lot of those reasons. But in 2025, it might be – I hesitate to say this because we don't know what the offense will look like, but I guess that's why I say it. You might need that defense to be ahead of the offense. And that sounds sort of weird because Jeremiah Smith still exists. But with who you have returning, and if you do go internal with this hire, you open with Texas. So now they'll have their own starting quarterback that they're rolling out there too for the first time in Arch Manning. But it's a lot to ask a Julian Sayin or a Lincoln Kienholz to be able to hit the ground running and, hey, let's go score 30 or let's go score in the 40s to go beat Texas. I don't think that's really the most realistic, regardless of who's calling the plays for Ohio State on offense. So it might be a thing where you need that defense to kind of evolve first and draw first blood in terms of finding their identity. But this is where Ryan Day and winning the national title again becomes invaluable. We've said this now probably 3 or 4 times throughout this show, so I apologize if it becomes a little bit stale. This is just how I feel. Knowing what a national title team, the national title defense looks like, operates like, smells like, walks like, all those things, that matters when you hire your next guy. And that should be the approach when it comes to setting your temperature next year. So you know what it looks like now. You do what all the great coaches do and adapt. That's the question for Ryan Day. That's the question for Ohio State. And that's the question they're going to have to answer with whoever's calling the defense next year in place of Jim Knowles. But again, looks are great. Scheme's great. Who are you, though, when times get tough? That's the important part of this whole thing. Now, speaking of looks, y'all that have been tuned into this show for any length of time, you know we rock with Axia on this show. Axia Time, the official timepiece of the college football playoff and the Heisman Trophy. Okay, they've been great to us. They've been great to y'all that have been using their product here throughout its existence and throughout their partnership with our show. Some quality timepieces here, all right, especially for the college football playoff. So if you had a team make the college football playoff that you root for, go check out AxiaTime.com because you want to go grab that limited edition timepiece from an Arizona State or a Boise State or SMU or whoever, or Penn State or an Ohio State. Now, if you're an Ohio State fan, listen closely. Axia Time, been some special surprises in the works, but one of those being if you order right now their national title watch for Ohio State, you get yourself some confetti in the box, not just confetti from Party City, though maybe that's where they got it from when it comes to what the college football playoff did, but confetti from the national title celebration in Atlanta. So you get your watch, get a little piece of history. It's a good deal. Again, go to AxiaTime.com. That's AXIATime.com. Check them out today. A watch that tells so much more than time. They're sweet too, dude. They're sweet. I mean, if we had a dog in the fight, I might pull the trigger on one of those Ohio State watches. I don't know. Cato, when App State makes the dance, bro, we're getting them. We're getting maybe like 2 for each wrist. It's gonna be sweet. Yeah, it's gonna be nice. It's gonna be nice. So this time next year, basically, we rock some App State watches. Now, speaking of Ohio State, there was we're all over the place with transitions today. But speaking of Ohio State, there was some news that came out over the weekend that allegedly, per Pete Nakos, Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate were both offered millions of dollars. Jeremiah Smith being offered right around $4.5 million, with Carnell Tate being offered right around $1 million to hit the transfer portal. And it got me thinking, man, tampering and poaching in college football is absolutely out of control. But what do you do about it? What do you do? I mean, this is a thing that is running rampant in our sport. Everyone knows it's happening, and nobody seems to really be able to do anything about it. And so that got me thinking, what would be the thing that if we were running a football program today, we would try and do? And the answer to me feels sort of obvious. Full disclaimer, this is not speaking to Ohio State. This is not speaking to anybody in particular. This is just a general discussion around tampering and poaching in college football. We proceed. The solution to me, my first gut reaction is it feels obvious. Hey, tell somebody. Be that tattletale. Be that snitch. Snitches get stitches. Okay, maybe so, but snitches keep their players. I'd have to think that's probably the way that works. But it seems like nobody really does that. So that got the gears turning. Why don't we see coaches turning in other coaches? And I get the optics part of it. Like, your house probably isn't all that clean. Even if it isn't you that's doing the tampering, you probably have somebody else on your staff who, if you were to tamper, or if you were to report a tampering, then maybe the NCAA comes knocking and they look at your house and say, oh, you're not tampering, but this coach is. Maybe it happens. Also, let's be real. You never know who's going to hire you next. Maybe you need a job tomorrow, and that coach you just turned in is the head coach at X, Y, and Z school, and you want to go work for him. The third part of it is, okay, I get it. Like, tattling is not really the best look in the world. I totally understand that. But talking to some folks in the college football coaching world, the responses that I got when I asked them this question of why don't coaches turn each other in is like, there's not really any point to it. Nobody actually really gets in trouble even when coaches are turned in because nobody can do anything about it. Why? Because nobody's actually in charge. It's sort of like if we were to pull up to the office today and I see Cato speeding in a school lane. Like he's going 60 down to 20, and I'm like, that's not okay. So I go to the office today and I talk to our boss and say, hey, listen, I love my guy Caden, but he's got a need for speed, man. Got a lead foot. Got to do something about this. My boss is like, that's unfortunate. What do you want me to do? I'm not in charge of that. Same deal with the NCAA right now. They're like, we'd love to do something. We're actually not in charge of anything. They have no real power. There's no governing body. We can't enforce something that we have no power over. And that's why the main solution everyone's calling for across the board is like, hey, we need a commissioner. We need a governing body. We need somebody in charge of this whole thing. And so you take that and say, great, let's go get a commissioner. Let's hire a commissioner today. Who's supposed to do that? There's no company to fill the job with. You can't put a posting out for a job that doesn't exist because the company itself doesn't exist. What I'm trying to say is if we were to try to hire a commissioner, who's supposed to be in charge of that? There's no apparatus to even start there. So that in itself lies the problem of why we can't really have any success when it comes to the whole tattletaling thing. Nobody gets in trouble, and also nobody's even in charge. So that's a whole situation in itself. But I started thinking, too, like, okay, if I'm a fan of Missouri, or I'm a fan of Louisville or Syracuse or whoever, I hate tampering. I'll say this right now, too. As a fan of college football, period, I hate tampering. I hate what it's doing to the sport. I hate the unethical nature of it. But at the exact same time, I hope my school's doing it. I hate that they're taking away our players, but I better sure as heck go tamper with someone else's players. Otherwise, I'm going to get got. It's like, what am I supposed to do? Just turn a blind eye and take the high road and then not try and tamper? And then what happens? I have less good players, so I have less results on the field, and so I lose more games, and so I'm out of a job. What am I supposed to do here? If I'm a fan, what am I rooting for? I hope my first thought, I said this, and I said it very tongue-in-cheek, obviously joking, but I probably would feel this way if I were a fan of a Power 4 school. Jeremiah Smith offered $4.5 million. Man, that's awful. I hate that. Hope it was Cornell. Hope Cornell's throwing their hat in the ring. Hope they're trying to get my guy over to Ithaca, New York to make some plays. That's neither here nor there, but again, like the solution just is, it's so tricky because if you're not using it, you're having it used against you. And that doesn't make it right. It doesn't mean that we should endorse it or be okay with it, but it does make it a game of survival for these coaches and these people that their lives depend on what these teams do on Saturday afternoons. So the solution, like I said, is having a governance. That'd be like the big, okay, we can maybe start to put together some real healing and real progress solution. But I think in real time, there's two immediate solutions that I think we can examine if we're trying to combat poaching. The first is the same solution that every other business and or industry and business puts into place, which is like you just fight fire with fire, dude. I don't like it, you don't like it, but if it's about money and they're going to take your guy, your top quarterback, your top receiver from a money perspective, okay, let's come correct with the dollars and cents. Let's put a better package together for X, Y, and Z player, and let's keep them home. Cool. I don't know this for a fact, but Ohio State, with the roster they had intact this season, keeping guys from going to the NFL or probably keeping other guys from transferring, I don't think that they're dealing with a small dollar amount. Have to believe that. The second solution is a little bit more grassroots, and it's the same reason why people that are, in their current job don't leave for more money, because they like their coworkers, they like the job they do, I like their boss. It's sort of simplistic and warm, fuzzy, feely, but I really do think in the day and age of where we are in college football, where everyone's offering a bag, the coaches that are able to be real with these kids and sit down and have a transparent conversation of, hey, this is what we think you're worth. You can probably make more somewhere else. There's no guarantee that you're going to be able to have the same success on the field as you're having here, but this is the reality. just being real with these kids and having transparent conversations, I think that goes a long way, especially when there's that credibility there to begin with. Like Kenny Dillingham talked about this on a podcast with Bustin' with the Boys. He's like, we're real with our guys. We're real with our guys, and they appreciate it, and we haven't had a lot of guys leave because of it. Now, again, I'm not pretending that money doesn't play some sort of factor for these kids. It absolutely can, and honestly, it probably should for some of these guys. But at the end of the day, there is still a relational element to college football that wins. Now, does it win less than maybe it used to? Sure. But a paycheck is nice, and I think the guys that are able to maybe zoom out and have this perspective choose to say the paycheck is nice, and maybe the paycheck is the end-all, be-all, but a paycheck hits once a week if you're lucky. Maybe it's bi-monthly, I don't know. But every single day you show up and go to work with the same people, the same locker room, the same staff. Having that be in a good spot goes a long way. I think it does, and I think that's maybe the other way you can try to combat tampering and poaching. And I have to believe now, I don't think Ohio State's keeping Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith in their roster for nothing, but I do think that the relationship with Brian Hartline, that locker room, having just won a national title, all those things, I don't think that hurt in keeping those guys in Columbus. So, will we ever see an end to tampering? I don't know, but we will see these schools with big budgets and strong cultures have the best chance to push back against them. Full stop. Full stop. Hey, this is awesome, man, having everyone tuned in here. It's late January, and we get to talk college football for a living. Absolutely hilarious, but phenomenal nonetheless. I'm glad to have you all tuned in. So let us know where you're watching from, where you're listening from, whether you're watching at work. We had some of y'all say you watch while you're studying for school. However, and wherever you're watching, we appreciate you. Let us know in the comment section and the live chat and all that. And again, make sure you're dialed in on the podcast platforms as well, trying to get that beefed up this offseason. So USC made a move in the personnel department that kind of flew under the radar just a little bit because they didn't hire a new OC or a new DC, extended Dantlin, which is a nice move. But USC hired GM Chad Bowden from Notre Dame. And I want to talk about the hire itself, but I also want to talk about the overall maybe statement it has for Lincoln Riley here going forward. Again, this is, I think, a pretty big deal in terms of the future of modern college football. Like the GM position is sort of newer to the space, but in the day and age of the portal, NIL, retaining your roster, all those things, having a dude at this position, like an absolute dog that Chad Bowden, from what I can tell, is, that's going to set you up for success in a pretty massive way. Look at what Notre Dame was this past year. Like, per everybody and their mama, Chad Bowden was Marcus Freeman's right-hand man that he trusted a lot when it came to recruiting and talent acquisition. Notre Dame just played for a national championship. So, of course, you can only do so much when it comes to culture and X's and O's, but having the players to make that all go, sounds like Chad Bowden had a pretty strong hand in getting in the right place for the Fighting Irish. So his role at USC is going to be just what I mentioned. Working out NIL deals, retaining the roster to some extent, building relationships, all those things. Like, he is spearheading, from what I can gather, the recruiting efforts for a lot of these classes here going forward in LA. So on one side, that's huge. I think this is going to help activate what USC is on the talent acquisition side. And it feels a little bit like, if you're USC, you've been waiting for a move like this. You've been waiting for something to get excited about on the going and getting dudes side of things for your football team. Because you look at USC at a 30,000-foot view, it's USC, it's LA, it's the NIL era. They should crush it right now. Like, if they get their ducks in a row, and it sounds like they've done more of that lately when it comes to getting NIL resources aligned, they should kill it, especially with the talent that exists in Southern California. Forget the state of California as a whole. Forget the national footprint. For USC to just win the state of California, that should be a layup every single year because of what I just said. NIL resources, LA. Forget the brand for a second. The brand in itself should be massive enough to give USC some major power. Like, they should be a top 10 class every single year on the recruiting trail, and they haven't been. Why? I think some of it probably has to do with lack of on-field success the last couple of seasons. But a lot of it, I think, does have to do with where they're at on the recruiting trail and the bat they're able to swing there. Bringing in a Chad Bowden should help remedy that. And that excites me because what has been the pushback for us and our concern openly about Lincoln Riley on this show? Good play caller, knows offense, great quarterback guy. Is he willing to adapt? Is he willing to maybe find some other ways to get this job done, or is he the dude that's just wanting to run his head full speed into the wall until it breaks? And I'm here for that, but at some point in time, if that wall doesn't break, you get a headache. And we pair these pieces together over the course of the last couple of years. Lincoln Riley has shown a trajectory and a trend of adapting. Danton Lynn, the DC, whether it was his point or not, Alex Grinch has got to go, bring in one of the best defensive staffs in college football. You see immediate results right away. Almost a full, darn near touchdown better when it comes to points allowed per game. Hey, recruiting has got to improve. We got to live in the top 10. What do you do? Go get one of the top GMs in college football from your rival, who, oh, by the way, just played for a national title. Adaptation. USC is also in a spot, for what it's worth, where I think adapting in small moves like this, not small moves, but maybe like small tweaks like this, like hiring a GM, which again isn't small, but I think it's small in terms of how you read it on a headline. USC is a spot where things can change pretty quickly, is my gut on this. Like, I don't think that USC going forward, if they were to operate at max capacity, should ever, again, be outside the top 10 in recruiting rankings, should ever be outside the top 25 when it comes to on-field product. People want to go to USC, especially in Southern California. Like, you're looking for an excuse to go live in 70-plus degree weather in the winter. Like, you're looking for an excuse to have Huntington Beach right down there and Santa Monica up there and have movie stars. Like, you're looking for an excuse to go be there. Oh, by the way, it's got a hallowed tradition of elite college football having been played there. There's Heisman's in Heritage Hall all over, man. There's national title trophies there. Like, there's a track record of success. It's not something you have to imagine, hey, can we break in and be the first to get it done? No, it's USC. And that's the thing where I'm talking on this show and just feel like I'm taking crazy pills where I'm like, do we not understand this is USC? Like, forget the whole SEC bias for a second. I got USC bias to me, man, because I've seen what it looks like when it's humming. I've seen what it's like to activate Los Angeles and to have that entire city dialed the heck in to what happens on Saturday afternoons in the Coliseum. It's special. It's something else. It takes college football by storm in a lot of ways. And so for USC to not be a player, in a lot of ways, I think you point to talent acquisition. You point to the way they did things internally for a long time. This is a move now that I'm not saying it's the end-all, be-all, but it's pointing in the right direction. It's pointing in the right direction, and that's massive. So, like we say a lot with this show, when it comes to big moves, whether it be in recruiting or the portal or on your staff, we take the Uncle Ben protocol, the Uncle Ben procedure. With great resources comes great responsibility. Great talent comes great responsibility. So we're entering into a world now where I think for Lincoln Riley, it's going to come down to how much are you able to get this roster to buy into a championship culture, to have a championship culture, all those things. And we're not for nothing, but we're entering also into a world in the transfer portal and NIL and the 12-team playoff era where the talent you have on your roster, if it is better than everyone else's by a substantial enough margin, you can win national championships. Just ask Ohio State. Didn't have the best regular season. It wasn't all put together how it was supposed to be put together in the first 12 games, but guess what? Caught their stride, caught their tempo, talent went out, won the national title. So this is a big move. I'm excited to see how it translates for USC on the recruiting trail and via the portal, but they're going to have a chance now. They're going to have a chance if they get things operating in the right direction, and I cannot wait to see what it all looks like. So we've been doing this series for a while here, our exit meeting series. Now, this exit meeting specifically is fueled by Rhule. Our friends over at Rhule, it's a brand new year, and they're all about, setting goals, New Year's resolutions, and we actually try to hit those goals on this show, as do you. So Rhule, a great way to help get that done. You don't always have time for breakfast, not always time to, grab the exact lunch that you want. So what you got to do is get locked in with Rhule. Their Black Edition ready to drink is a complete meal in a bottle, high in protein, low in sugar, and packed with nutrients your body needs to perform at its best. Now, new customers can try it 15% off plus a free gift using my exclusive code HARDCOUNT15. It's that's HARDCOUNT15. Get locked in over there, 15% off plus a free gift with that code. That's HUEL at Rhule.com. Get locked in. Nutritionally complete meals in minutes so you can focus on what really matters. So the folks over in Nebraska are focusing on what really matters, and what really matters now is phase 3 of the Matt Rhule experience. Because for the longest time, what did we talk about? They could just win a bowl game. If they could just get to a bowl game, monkey off the back, we'd be happy, we'd be throwing parades in the streets of Lincoln, and the vibes would be immaculate once again. Well, you did that. Did it with a true freshman quarterback and 2 coordinators on the offensive side. Now it's about going and actually winning something if you're a Nebraska fan. So really quickly, Nebraska fans, had a lot of y'all get dialed in. If you're a college football sicko, and you are by watching a college football video at the end of January, make sure you're locked in. Make sure you're subscribed. Want to hear from y'all in terms of what you want to see on this show. Appreciate you in advance for being subscribed and for being dialed. So again, no more can they win a bowl. They've done that. That's cool. We're not about winning bowl games in Lincoln, Nebraska, contrary to maybe what recent history has told you. This is a hallowed program with a lot of tradition and a lot of trophies out there in Lincoln. That means something. So phase 3 for Matt Rhule, the reason why we phrase it like that is phase 3 is typically when Matt Rhule does his best work. Like, look at his past 2 jobs at the college level. Temple, year 1, 2 wins. All right, it's not great. It's a project. Year 3, 10 wins, play for a conference title. Baylor, first year, plays as a dumpster fire. 1 win. Baylor, year 3, 11 wins, play for a Big 12 title. For Nebraska, their first year under Matt Rhule was better than either of those years at Baylor and Temple. So in some ways, you feel like maybe you were ahead of schedule. True freshman quarterback, as I've mentioned now a couple of times throughout this segment, in year 2, you get to 7 wins with the bowl win. That's awesome. But the task for Nebraska in year 3 is curious because I don't think it's going to be quite as much continuity as maybe some of those previous teams did for Matt Rhule at Baylor and Temple. You're going to have to be a lot more, I think, Dylan Raiola-centric, which isn't a bad thing. I mean, when you brought Dylan Raiola to Lincoln as a high-profile cat previously committed to Georgia, like, you brought him there to be the reason you won football games. And last year he was in different spots, but also that was a really good defense, a really veteran defense. You knew it was going to be a thing where we're going to run the football, going to play great defense. We're going to try and compliment him as much as possible. We're not going to have to ask him to go be Superman every single weekend. And you did that enough to where you won 7 ball games. But now with the way this roster is turned over, you still keep that Matt Rhule, blue-collar grit and attitude and energy and all those things. But I do think you say, Dylan Raiola, just what I said, we brought you here for a reason. This is that year where we need you to take that next step and be that guy. And so I love so much that they went out and got him a Dane Key via the portal. I think that was one of the sneakiest acquisitions, a wide receiver from Kentucky, who was a big play waiting to happen at Kentucky when it comes to his yards per catch. But when you look at the gauntlet for Nebraska that's ahead of them on this 2025 schedule, which is crazy. We're sitting here in January looking at 2025 schedules. I'm not saying this is happening. I'm not even saying I'm predicting this. But if I'm looking across the conference last year and seeing what Indiana did and during their schedule, Nebraska's schedule isn't as favorable, but what's keeping Nebraska from doing what Indiana did? Now, I'm not predicting 10 wins, but just take a look at this. You got Michigan at home, potentially with a freshman quarterback. You got USC at home in November. You have non-conference of Cincinnati, Akron, and Houston Christian. I believe you go to Penn State towards the end of the year, but no Ohio State, no Oregon. I'm just saying there's a path there. It's not the craziest thing in the world to think that if we're going to go ahead and say that Matt Rhule does what he does in year 3, which is have a big pop year and they go win double-digit games, that puts you in the playoff. Now, hear me clearly. The Big 12, God bless them, and Temple playing in the American, it's a different conference than the Big 10. But again, I don't think it's the most ignorant thought in the world to assume that could be Nebraska's path. It goes back to Raiola, though. Can you go from being the quarterback to being the guy? And we've said it a lot on this show around different cats, but I'll say it right now around Raiola. Last year, he was confident. I think he was a catalyst in a lot of ways, but for him, the next step is elevating everyone else around him. That's the next step. Can you be the guy? Can you be the reason why on 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8 plus, we go pick up the first down? Maybe the protection's not perfect. Maybe we don't get the look that we want. I love adding Dana Holgerson. We skipped over that. I think you saw ROI from the jump. But can you take Dylan Raiola's first year and show me there's real progress, real light bulbs going on over the course of the spring into the fall, and be the reason why Nebraska, if they got to go win a shootout, brought him there for a reason. Can he go be the reason you win a shootout? I think that's probably the next step for him, and you might have to depend on that a little bit more with what you lose from this team. So again, I'm not trying to sell hopium. I'm not trying to pander. I'm just saying if I look at this schedule from a Nebraska fan, it feels very workable. I like the momentum. I like Dylan Raiola and what he was as a recruit, and I like Matt Rhule in year 3. Some things are certain in life. Death, taxes, and Matt Rhule doing his best work in year 3. And that's where I would place my money. Even if they don't go to the college football playoff, I'd place my money if I'm a Nebraska fan on an improvement from this past season. Hey, tomorrow's going to be a lot of fun. We have got what I would call prisoner of the moment rankings for the top 10 coaches right now in the sport. Not excited to jump into that because I know it will be a full face in the fan experience, and we're making a list, so we're already wrong. But get out on the socials. Let me know who you think the top 10 coaches right now are in the sport, and we'll give you our list on tomorrow's show. For Cato on the 1s and 2s, about to be rocking an App State college football playoff watch this time next year. For myself, JD PicKell, we love y'all. We appreciate y'all. We're going to keep this thing full head of steam, keeping it rolling. We'll see y'all next time.